This morning's reading is from Genesis, chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. After these events, the Lord's word came to Abram in a vision. "Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your protector. Your reward will be very great." But Abram said, "Lord God, what can you possibly give me, since I still have no children? The head of my household is Eliezer, a man from Damascus." He continued, "Since you haven't given me any children, the head of my household will be my heir." The Lord's word came immediately to him. "This man will not be your heir. Your heir will definitely be your very own biological child." Then he brought Abram outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars if you think you can count them." He continued, "This is how many children you will have." Abram trusted the Lord, and the Lord recognized Abram's high moral character. The word of the Lord.
As numerous as the stars in the sky. Can you imagine what must have been going through his mind when Abram heard those words spoken to him? Can you imagine the vision that Abraham would have been able to witness in that day and age, in that time before electricity and the light pollution that we have unleashed upon our evening and night skies, that when he would wander out from his tent and look up on a clear night, imagine the sight he must have seen. Growing up on a farm, and just far enough away from a smallish town that the light pollution wasn't terrible, I discovered at a medium young age that after it got dark, I could go out to the far edge of our property where 3 grain bins stood. And it happened to be the far edge away from town, about a mile away. And so in doing so, I could go back behind these grain bins, and it would shield out the floodlight that stayed lit, the security light, all night over the farm. And it would also block out any of the light pollution that was coming in from my town. So that if you sat and you stayed there for a few minutes, let your eyes adjust to the darkness and your night vision to bring itself into bearing and being, you could just stop and you could sit behind the grain bins and you could look up. And the view was incredible. You'd look off into the north sky and you could see that faithful Polaris North Star, the Little Dipper. You could watch the other constellations beginning their slow movements around it. And when you looked straight up on a clear enough night, you could just make out the barest wisps of the Milky Way. If I'd have been thinking when I was home a few weeks back, the sky was clear enough and the moon was hidden away enough, if I'd have been thinking, I would have gone out behind the grain bins and I would have snapped a photo to share with you all, and I didn't get that done. And then in a moment of genius, I thought, oh, Mom could take one. So I texted Mom really quickly and said, "Can you go out tonight and check?" Earlier this week. And she did, and the moon was so bright, it was blocking out some of the view. And she checked for a couple of nights, but I knew the moon cycles had us in, so I've got no picture for you. Maybe you've seen some of them on the internet or in a magazine or in the news, those images that people take in these dark sky locations where the light pollution is minimal to none and the Milky Way lights up in the sky. Well, I couldn't quite see that, but I could see enough that it always amazed me. So you can imagine my surprise when I arrived here in September 3 years ago for my second interview and my candidating Sunday with you as a congregation. Yuki and I came in on Friday evening. We landed at SeaTac, and of course, not really realizing, maybe not taking your word for just how bad I-5 really was, we came in on Friday night right in the middle of the worst traffic heading out of Seattle. We had our rental car, and we were preparing to loop through Tacoma and get here to the hotel in town. And so we pulled up our Google Maps, and it was basically red as far as the map could see. So needless to say, at that point, we just said, you know what? Find a restaurant nearby. We'll stop. We'll eat dinner. We'll take our time. I think somebody else has got our microphone channel. Anyway, don't get ahead of us. We're not serving communion yet, so not quite there yet. So we took our time and waited. So that meant it was starting to get dark. And as I learned when I got here, seriously, this is my sermon. As I got here, I learned that the days can be much longer than I'm used to, and then in winter, the nights get much longer. So it gets dark earlier, and it's darker, especially coming from Chicago. Everything's darker after Chicago. But we came out of Tacoma late enough, and we're heading up the highway, and I had forgotten about two things. One, that we have trees, very tall trees here. And two, we have lots of them. And so as we're making our way up the highway, and even more so where it splits at times, so you can't even see the oncoming traffic in certain places because of the elevations and the distance, and sometimes there are trees between us. But we're driving after dark, heading up the highway, and I am looking out, and all I see is blackness everywhere I look. And I have this moment of, what have we done? Is this really where we're supposed to be? Because I've never lived anywhere in my life where the night felt so dark as when we were driving up the highway that Friday night in September. And I remember thinking, where is my night sky? I'm away from Chicago. I should be able to see stars. Well, I hadn't quite internalized that the clouds come here as well. It's not just trees, it's clouds. It's everything that could go wrong. Tall trees, cloud cover. And I'm just sitting here going, oh, I'm missing something. Because those were moments of awe and of wonder for me. And they were moments that only grew as I got older and learned more. I don't know whether it was reading Sagan's works or not, but somebody introduced me to that concept of when you look up into the night sky and you view these stars, not only are you casting your vision out over distances that are immense and great, miles upon miles upon miles upon miles beyond imagination. God should have said that Abraham's descendants would be as many as the miles to the nearest star. The result would have been the same. But then learning that, in addition to that, because light can only travel as fast as light can travel, that not only are we looking beyond the distance we can humanly fathom, but we're looking backward in time, years upon years upon years. That the imagery of the sky that we see, if we were to go out tonight and if the clouds were to cooperate, is an image and a vision of a constellation and collection of stars that may have moved on, that may have burned out by now. As far as we know, one of them may have exploded, and the vision of its supernova is coming, and by the time it gets here, we will be 3-4 generations removed, because light travels so slowly that to look into the depth of the night is to look deeply into the past. That was a profoundly spiritual thought for me the first time I took that knowledge and I stepped out behind the grain bins and I looked up into the Milky Way. And then I thought, and that's just our galaxy. That's to say nothing of the sky and the stars beyond this Milky Way galaxy. I loved our trips Yuki and I would make to the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. We made it a couple times part of our Lenten discipline that one day a week we had a membership there. We would go to the planetarium and we'd set up shop in the morning and we'd work. She'd work on her studies, I would work on my church work in the cafeteria area. They had internet, so we could just log on, set up our laptops, and do that. And then we'd spend the afternoon, we either watch videos or we'd tour the planetarium. And I remembered one where they were looking at the ultra deep field image. And they gave all of us, as we went in, a penny. And they invited us to hold it up. And they said, this penny is the area of the ultra deep field inside the original deep field image. And then they flashed the vision on the screen of everything they saw in it. And at that point, you're looking so far away, you can't see stars. You're seeing galaxies of stars. Oh, it was a powerful, powerful thing for me. So losing sight of that anchoring to the sky, to the distance, to the past, to me, to something that was holy, a reminder of the immensity of our God. That first drive up as I'm looking to take a job at my next church and the sky is dark, I felt disconnected with something powerful to me. For me, that is a view into the infinite and beyond, and an anchoring in a past that grounds who I am in the present. Now, Abraham, on the other hand, he didn't have the science that we have today. He wouldn't have necessarily known or understood what I've been talking about. He has his own creation myths and stories to explain the stars, but he still would have known the same thing that you and I know, that to try to count the night sky is a futile enterprise. There is no way we can count, and by the time we've started, as the earth rotates, the stars we've counted will start slipping out of our view and we'll lose track. There is no way humanly possible for any single human being to measure and account for the stars in the sky. So I wonder, that first night after receiving that word that he would have heirs and his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky, I can't help but wonder if Abram didn't step outside of his tent, walk away from any fires or torches, give himself a moment to adjust, and look up. And he saw a future that would be years and years upon years beyond him, but a promise that he embraced and in which he trusted. My past was Abraham's future. And in the middle of it all is God's promise, a covenant made not just for Abram, but for us as well. A covenant claimed by all three of the Abrahamic religions. We Christians claim it through Jesus and the descent and his descendants back to Abram and the founding of the Israelite people. Look around the room today. Forget the night sky for a moment and just think upon that promise. Here is but one small constellation in that sky that was Abram's future. We are the stars. We are the descendants. We are the present that was Abram's future. We are called into this moment as God's beloved children, each and every one of us, along with so many others around this world, in many ways as numerous as the stars in the sky. And we're called to step into that covenant in awe and in wonder at a God who could create a universe that for us stretches beyond the reach of our imagination, even as we struggle to grasp it and know it. For a God who could promise Abram a future that was so great he had no hope of being able to count it, could only trust, and God called that righteousness. And in a present where the multitude of this earth, our siblings, our children in God, are so great and so many, we can never hope to know or meet them all. God calls us into this covenant to remember that we are part of a story that lives long before us and will live long beyond us. We have these small parts that we play now, and we play them out in responding like Abram did, in ways that God would call righteous, in ways that Christ would see are good, in care, in humility, in hope, and looking out for one another. We see so many acts of senseless violence take place beyond our walls, and give thanks, having seen some of them happen within the walls of faith communities as well, that they aren't happening within ours. We see so many actions of dismissal and removal. We look at those who have been forced out of their homes, who live in camps, who are struggling and waiting. Another constellation in God's night sky. Siblings, children of God, heirs to the promise, struggling under the violence of a world that values the dollar more than it does the people. We find ourselves called not to know and to count and to name each and every star in this constellation of God's beloved children, but to appreciate each and every one and find ways to extend the care that we experience, I hope, in this place, to them as well, in ways small or great, whatever we can muster or manage. This is what it means to be in covenant. It isn't just a promise between ourselves and our God. It's a promise between ourselves and one another and our God. It is our past. It is our future. And we live it out right now, here in our present. So may we find ways to be in awe and wonder at the greatness of God. May we find ways to be grounded in the past, in the stories of our faith, through Abram, through the prophets, through Jesus, through those who have brought us up and raised us through these last 100 years as First Christian Church. May we anchor ourselves so that we can become the grounding and the stories that our future may one day tell as well. But may we embrace and answer our calls to live out the historic faith that we know through Jesus Christ, here in this present, in this place, and in this world, for each and every one of the stars that God promised to Abram, and God binds in covenant with us. This is our commission. This is our call. This is our gospel. Amen.